Hey there, and welcome. Today we are tackling a really interesting puzzle, one that affects pretty much everything we do. Why are some of the promises we make legally binding, while others are, well, just words? Let's jump right in and try to solve this thing.
I mean, really think about it for a second. You sign a mortgage, right? And boom, you are on the hook for decades. But you promise your roommate you'll take out the trash, and if you forget, maybe you get an eye roll, but you're not getting sued. So what's the difference? What is that secret sauce that turns a regular, everyday promise into a contract the law will actually enforce? Let's start digging for clues.
So, the first place you'd probably think to look is morality. It just feels right, doesn't it? Maybe a contract is just a really serious promise, and the law gets involved because, keeping your word is the right thing to do.
This idea actually has a name. It's called promise theory. And it's pretty simple. It says that when you make a promise, you're using your own freedom, your autonomy, to bind yourself to a course of action. And the law steps in to back that up, to protect the trust that makes everything in society run smoothly. It's a clean, powerful idea. A deal is a deal, and promises should be kept.
You can even break this down a bit. See, there's the general social morality we all live by. The basics, like don't hurt people. But then there's this special kind of morality, promissory morality. And that's a duty you actually create and place on yourself the second you give someone your word.
But just when that seems like a nice, neat answer, we hit our first major plot twist. This quote right here shows a massive crack in the theory. The law itself says, flat out, that a promise all by itself doesn't cut it. To be enforceable, there has to be something else, some other factor. So, okay, morality is definitely a piece of the puzzle, but it can't be the whole picture. The hunt continues. All right, let's bring in our next suspect, will theory. This one's kind of a cousin to promise theory. The argument here is that a contract is all about what you intended, your free will. It's a meeting of the minds. And the reason a court can force you to follow through is that by signing the contract, you basically gave them permission ahead of time. You willed it to happen.
But will theory slams right into a huge brick wall. And here it is. The law almost never cares what was secretly going on inside your head, your subjective intent. It doesn't matter if you had your fingers crossed. What the law cares about is what a reasonable person would have thought you meant, based on your words and your actions. That's objective intent. If the law really wanted to protect your will, it would care about what you were actually thinking. Since it doesn't, will theory is out too.
Okay, so if it's not strictly about morality or inner thoughts, maybe the answer is a lot more practical. Let's shift gears. Forget about why we make promises and start looking at the real-world consequences of breaking them.
And this brings us right to something called reliance theory. The idea here is that if you promise me something and I act on it, I change my plans or spend money because I was counting on you, then the law should step in to protect me. It's not about the promise itself. It's about the harm that happens when I relied on that promise and you broke it.
But, oops. This theory walks straight into a logical loop. Think about it. Why would you rely on a promise in the first place? Well, probably because you assume it's legally binding, right? So the law makes it binding because you relied on it, but you only relied on it because you thought the law would make it binding. It's a circle. It never actually explains what makes a promise worth relying on to begin with. All right, time to bring in the economists. This is efficiency theory. This viewpoint just throws out all the fuzzy stuff about morals and reliance and says it's all about the numbers. We enforce contracts because it's good for the economy, period. It helps businesses plan, encourages people to work together, and basically makes the whole economic pie bigger for everyone. But this theory has some pretty big issues. First, it's more of a way to measure results than a real reason we feel obligated to do something. It can't explain why a business deal is legally binding, but our promise to meet a friend for lunch isn't. And it leads to this really weird idea of an efficient breach, which says it's totally okay to break a contract as long as you pay the other person and still make a profit. That just doesn't feel right, does it?
So, what if we just simplify? Maybe it's all about fairness. That's the idea behind substantive fairness theory. If a deal seems balanced and nobody's getting ripped off, the law should back it up. If it's totally one-sided and exploitative, the law should throw it out. Simple as that.
But again, this doesn't solve our original puzzle. Think about it. You can make a perfectly fair promise to help a friend move next weekend. It's balanced, it's not unfair to anyone, but no court in the world is going to get involved if you back out. So yeah, fairness matters, but it isn't the key that unlocks the whole mystery. So now let's talk about the most famous piece of this puzzle, the one that probably comes to your mind first when you hear the word contract. and that's the idea of the bargain. This is the classic bargain theory. It's built around a legal concept called consideration. It's the quid pro, the this for that. I give you something, you give me something. This mutual exchange, this trade, is supposedly what elevates a mere promise into a full-blown contract.
And honestly, for a very long time, most people thought this was the final answer. But it's just not the whole story. The big problem is that courts do sometimes enforce promises where there isn't a clear bargain, like a pledge to a charity. So even though the bargain is a huge critical piece, it can't be the fundamental principle we're searching for.
Okay, so we've looked at all the clues, we've chased down all the usual suspects, morality, will, reliance, efficiency, and they've all led to dead ends. So now we arrive at a theory that just might tie it all together. This is the big reveal. The answer might just be hiding in the simple but incredibly powerful idea of consent.
So welcome to consent theory. And what this theory does is reframe the entire question. A contract isn't really about a promise or even a bargain. It's about the transfer of rights. Think of contract law as the official rulebook for how we give something we're entitled to over to someone else. And the single most important action that makes that transfer valid, both morally and legally, is consent.
Here's how it works, broken down into 3 easy steps. Step 1, we all have what you can call entitlements. These are our legal rights to our stuff, our labor, our money. Step 2, a contract is just the formal tool we use to transfer one of those rights to another person. And step 3, here's the kicker, the trigger for that whole process, the thing that makes the transfer stick, is showing that you consent.
And what's so cool about this theory is how it cleans up all of our earlier messes. It explains why objective intent, what you say and do, matters so much. That's how we signal our consent. It explains why some promises without a bargain still get enforced, because they are still a clear consent to transfer a right. And it perfectly explains all those legal defenses like fraud or duress. They're all just different ways of saying that real, valid consent was never actually given. Case closed.
So, we've journeyed from morals to economics to reliance, and we've finally landed on consent. But what's the big takeaway here? Why does any of this matter in the real world? Let's sum it all up.
Here's the bottom line. A contract is so much more than just a serious promise. It is the formal act of consenting to transfer one of your legal rights to another person. Your mortgage is binding not just because you promised to pay, but because you formally consented to transfer your right to your future money over to the bank. Promising to take out the trash, you're not transferring any rights. You're just making a promise. And that's the difference.
And that leads us to one last, really big question for today's world. We consent to things constantly, right? Every time we click I agree on some massive wall of text that nobody ever reads. In a world like that, what does it really mean to consent? And is our legal system, which is built on this idea, ready to handle that question? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me.